A Course in
What?
with Cynthia Morgan.
Hey, course friends. Welcome to A Course in What? I'm Cynthia Morgan, and this is a podcast in which I read and discuss the text of A Course in Miracles. And we are on podcast episode 18. And we're on chapter 2, the separation and the atonement, section 5, the function of the miracle worker. And we read the first 5 paragraphs in episode 17, and we'll continue reading this section, paragraphs 6 through 10, today. And then the next podcast will be the special principles of miracle workers, as you see on page 27. And then we'll be done with this entire section. So this section is talking about healing our own minds as miracle workers and helping others to heal their mind as well. So let's just jump right in and continue on. Paragraph 6, sentence 1. It should be emphasized again that the body does not learn any more than it creates. So Kenneth Wapnick talked about how there's a third part of our mind, and he called that the decision maker. And that's the part of the mind that chooses between the ego and the Holy Spirit. The decision maker is the part of the mind that learns. For instance, each time it chooses the ego, it realizes, or we, a part of us realizes, that we don't really win when we choose the ego. It doesn't really get our needs met. It may feel that way temporarily, but ultimately we're left feeling more stuck, more hopeless, angry, whatever. So each time the decision maker chooses the ego, it doesn't get its real needs met. The body can't learn because, as we've talked about before, it's an effect of the mind. It's like a computer screen. It's doing what the programmer is programming it to do. It doesn't create, meaning it doesn't have the power to create anything eternal. It doesn't have that creative potential of its own. Only the mind is creative. Sentence 2, as a learning device, it merely follows the learner. But if it is falsely endowed with self-initiative, it becomes a serious obstruction to the very learning it should facilitate. So as a learning device, meaning the body is a learning device, it merely follows our mind. But if we perceive power in the body, if we falsely endow it with the ability to learn and to create, then that will only obstruct our learning because we're further and further away from where true learning is, from where our creative ability is, from where the problem is, and where the solution is, which is in our mind. 3, only the mind is capable of illumination. So in other words, illumination is another way of saying of knowing. 4, spirit is already illuminated, and the body in itself is too dense. So spirit is in a state of knowing. The body then, being a part of the illusion, cannot know. It's dense. 5, the mind, however, can bring its illumination to the body by recognizing that it is not the learner and is therefore unamenable to learning. So this is another way of saying that we're correcting the level confusion, recognizing the true learner, which is in the mind. 6, the body is, however, easily brought into alignment with a mind that has learned to look beyond it toward the light. And in the last 2 paragraphs of this section, paragraph 9 and 10, Jesus talks about charity and redefines that idea. And really, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's what this sentence is. This is the definition of charity, really. Looking beyond the body toward the light. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So we look beyond the body to the true source of power in the mind. And this is the Holy Spirit's vision. He sees our illusions, he sees the body, but he looks past all of that to the truth. Paragraph 7, sentence 1. Corrective learning always begins with the awakening of spirit and the turning away from the belief in physical sight. So just like when Helen and Bill were on their way to that university faculty staff meeting and they were complaining about the backstabbing, etc., that went on in that setting. And Bill said that he wanted to find a different way to relate to people and to each other, and a way for him to feel different. And Helen said, I'll help you find that other way. And so from that idea, there must be another way, they went from looking at the problem, which are the specific relationships and the backstabbing, et cetera, and the stress of that situation, into their minds, and said there must be another way of perceiving these meetings, another way of being and living. And that is the awakening of the spirit in that moment, turning away from the belief in physical sight. And that's true for all of us. At some point, we become disillusioned with the world. We become disillusioned with not just things that are occurring in our lives, but the world in general, all the problems of the world. And we too have that spiritual awakening. And that's the corrective learning, turning away from recognizing the physical world as the only source of whatever it is we're looking for. 2, this often entails fear because you are afraid of what your spiritual sight will show you. And like the situation with Helen and Bill, once Helen agreed to help him find this other way, she started having all of those psychic experiences. And those psychic experiences brought up a lot of fear in her. And it can entail fear because it's the beginning of the undoing of the belief in separation of the ego thought system. 3, I said before that the Holy Spirit cannot see error and is capable only of looking beyond it to the defense of atonement. So the Holy Spirit's vision looks beyond error, beyond separation, beyond what we believe in to be real, and looks only to the atonement, that all of this has been undone. The atonement is that defense against the dream, the defense against the ego, because it's the correction of everything that we've made. 4, there is no doubt that this may produce discomfort, yet the discomfort is not the final outcome of the perception. So fear is going to arise because the ego is afraid of the light. If you turn on a light in a darkened room, the darkness disappears. And that discomfort we feel when we begin to step on this spiritual journey is simply the fear of the ego's undoing. But Jesus is saying here, but that's not the end. You just keep going, because the outcome, he says, is certain. The outcome of peace and love and happiness is guaranteed us. And this sort of reminds me of, I've had a couple of out-of-body experiences, and I've always been too afraid to continue them. So when they've started to happen, I've recognized that I was about to leave my body. And both times it occurred, it was really scary to me. That fear stopped my progression and the process. But at this point, I've always stopped them. And so the truth is, though, I don't know what lies beyond it. I've always just stopped in the midst of terror, but I don't know if something amazing and beautiful and peaceful would occur if I allowed myself to continue that process. 5, when the Holy Spirit is permitted to look upon the defilement of the altar, he also looks immediately towards the atonement. So the Holy Spirit, again, sees our illusion and then recognizes the truth. So once we had the thought of separation, the original thought of separation as a one Son of God, all of the carpet of time unrolled. Everything happened. And in that same instant, we were given the atonement, and the Holy Spirit rolled the carpet of time back up. So this is saying basically the same thing, that the Holy Spirit sees what happened to our mind, the defilement of the altar, the defilement of our mind, and immediately looks beyond that to the truth. 6, Nothing he perceives can induce fear. So thinking with the Holy Spirit cannot bring fear. It's impossible because fear is of the ego. 7, everything that results from spiritual awareness is merely channelized toward correction. So everything perceived with the Holy Spirit in our mind is bringing us home. It's correcting our decision to choose the ego as our teacher. 8, discomfort is aroused only to bring the need for correction into awareness. So discomfort, if properly perceived, is simply showing us that we've fallen off the path. We need to realign ourselves, bring ourselves back to center, bring ourselves back to the Holy Spirit in our mind. So there's discomfort in the mind, but it also shows up as discomfort in the body. Again, the body is simply reflecting the mind. Paragraph 8. Sentence 1. The fear of healing arises in the end from an unwillingness to accept unequivocally that healing is necessary. So that fear comes from still believing that there's something to gain in this world and in our body by listening to the ego, by having the ego guide us through this illusion. And that's where the fear comes from, because somewhere inside of us, we know that the ego doesn't know what it's doing. We know that the ego isn't the answer, but we continue to listen to it anyway. And I mean, how many times have we done that in our own lives? We know that we should be choosing to perceive something differently or say something differently or do something differently, but we continue to choose the ego, whether it's in our behavior or a response to conversation. We all think that there is value in our ego. 2, what the physical eye sees is not corrective, nor can error be corrected by any device that can be seen physically. So healing, once again, is in the mind. We change our mind to love and oneness, and as a result, we help change others' minds to love and oneness. Then the effects will begin to change the world. Again, the problem is in the mind, and the solution is in the mind, and that can't be corrected by physical means. It has to be changed through a perceptual shift. 3, as long as you believe in what your physical sight tells you, your attempts at correction will be misguided. So as long as you continue to believe that there is value in the world and that something in the world can shift you and bring you peace or happiness or sustain your joy or whatever that is, and then all of those attempts will be misdirected because it's not in the world. 4, the real vision is obscured because you cannot endure to see your own defiled altar. So this means that we just really don't want to look within. We don't want to look at the ego thought system. We don't want to look at the sin, the fear, the guilt that's in our mind. We don't want to look at what we think that we've done to God, which is turn our back to Him and separate. And because of that, our real vision is obscured. The real vision is obscured every time that you choose the ego thought system, because you'll be acting under the guidance of the ego, and the ego can't see its own defiled choices. 5, but since the altar has been defiled, your state becomes doubly dangerous unless it is perceived. So doubly dangerous means that the mind is defiled and you won't look to the mind to heal it. You'll look to the world, and that's doubly dangerous. Paragraph 9, sentence 1. Healing is an ability that developed after the separation, before which it was unnecessary. Okay, so these are the 2 paragraphs, 9 and 10, that are going to talk about charity, as I mentioned. And once again, charity in A Course in Miracles is not about doing anything in the world, as you may have guessed. It's about perceiving a situation differently. It's a way of perceiving another. Of course, once you begin to perceive another differently, that will most likely change what you do or your behavior in the world. So healing wasn't necessary in oneness. And just as sickness is separation, healing is that state of joining. 2, like all aspects of the belief in space and time, it is temporary. So we don't need healing in heaven in that state of love and oneness, or once we wake up. We just temporarily need it now while we're asleep, while we're stuck in the dream of separation. 3, however, as long as time persists, healing is needed as a means of protection. So again, the atonement is the defense against the dream of separation, against further sleeping. It's a defense against fear and guilt. Healing is that same idea of the atonement, that it's needed as a protection against the ego thought system. 4, this is because healing rests on charity, and charity is a way of perceiving the perfection of another, even if you cannot perceive it in yourself. So you're charitable when you make efforts to look beyond people's behavior and recognize that they're stuck in their own fear and guilt, and you see the truth about them, even if you can only just imagine a light around them, even if you can just glimpse something else in them, that's helping you to awaken to the truth, and it's helping them as well. And you're being charitable when you can perceive this, even if you can't perceive it in yourself in those moments, or the other person can't perceive it in him or herself either. 5, most of the loftier concepts of which you are capable now are time dependent. So they're time dependent because they're necessary in time, in the illusion. 6, charity is really a weaker reflection of a much more powerful love encompassment that is far beyond any form of charity you can conceive of as yet. So this is talking about that revelation, the oneness with God, that unspeakable love that awaits us when we arrive home. 7, charity is essential to right-mindedness in the limited sense in which it can now be attained. So the limited sense is that sense that we are capable of understanding it with a mind filled with fear and guilt. We can't know that unspeakable love right now, but we can know charity. We can begin to glimpse the truth in ourselves and in other people. Paragraph 10. Charity is a way of looking at another as if he had already gone far beyond his actual accomplishments in time. So instead of getting angry at somebody, what we do is we look beyond our own anger and we look beyond what that person did, and we attempt to perceive once again that light in that human being, that truth, that he or she is an innocent child of God, just as you are an innocent child of God. You try to hold a vision of them having accept the atonement for themselves, the idea of forgiving them, that they know not what they do. I try to find the light in them, as I mentioned, and remember, 2, since his own thinking is faulty, he cannot see the atonement for himself, or he would have no need of charity. So again, I see in him what he can't see in himself. If he could see it, he wouldn't even need my charity. 3, the charity that is accorded him is both an acknowledgement that he needs help and a recognition that he will accept it. So he will accept it because all of us will accept it at some point. That's the end result of this entire movie. It's a happy ending. It's the script where we all remember that within ourselves and within everybody else, and we go home. 4, both of these perceptions clearly imply their dependence on time, making it apparent that charity still lies within the limitations of the world. So this is what Jesus is telling us to do now, to see that light in that other person, or to see the truth of that other person. So that's what we do now under these circumstances, meaning in the dream. within the limitations of this world. 5. I said before that only revelation transcends time. So we've talked a lot in other podcast episodes about revelation. It's that unspeakable love that comes from God, and we get glimpses of it, very fleeting glimpses occasionally in our lives where we feel completely at peace and completely present and completely forgiving and forgivable and loving and lovable. And the reason that it transcends time and space is because its origin is outside of the dream. 6, the miracle as an expression of charity can only shorten it. So it meaning time. Again, the miracle is that shift in perception. Like the miracle, charity is shifting our perception, and that helps us to reach that revelatory state of beingness. And the more we shift our perception, the more we practice that spiritual sight, the closer we come to home. So it shortens time. 7. It must be understood, however, that whenever you offer a miracle to another, you are shortening the suffering of both of you. Because if we don't offer a miracle, we're staying stuck in our ego, and that keeps us trapped in time or keeps us trapped in the reincarnation cycle of coming back, having to learn that. So we're also shortening his or her suffering because all minds are joined. And at some point, they're receiving that healing as well. 8. This corrects retroactively as well as progressively. So in other words, we've talked about this in the miracle principles, that the miracle heals the past and the future. So that's what this is saying as well, that charity looking beyond the body or their behavior heals the past as well as the future. Okay, so we'll end there for today. And if you'd like to stay in touch with me, I love that. You can introduce yourself, or if you have a question or comment, you can write me at acourseinwhat@gmail.com. And I'm on Facebook at facebook.com/Cynthia Morgan Hypnotherapy, and also on Twitter at Cynthia S. Morgan. So thank you for joining me today. I hope that was helpful. And if you'd like to say the summary of A Course in Miracles with me, that would be great. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God.